Hey everyone, welcome back to She Birds Podcast. My name is Brooke Wright, and today's guest is Joel. Hi, Joel.
Hi, Brooke.
Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
So, can you tell us what inspired the chaotic dynamic between Wincott and Tyche? I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but you can correct me.
Yeah, it's Torin. Well, I mean, they're father and son, ish. So, and they're both thieves, and they kind of wound up with one another. That it wasn't really a choice, and so I suppose when you've got one elderly malcontent thief who ends up having to raise a child on his own, but refuses to give up his career as a thief, and thinks that it's actually smart to raise his child as a thief, then that can lead to, a number of issues over time, not the least of which is that the child becomes a thief. He's not a bad one, and neither of them are particularly trustworthy. So that's that. I mean, I would say broader than that, there's definitely a father-son dynamic there. And so I leaned in heavily into what that can be like.
Okay. So is this like this is outside of the questions I have asked for you. Have listed for you. But is this kind of like Dungeons and Dragons meets the little kid with the sword, you know what I'm talking about? And he lifts up the sword.
Like Sword in the Stone?
Yeah. Is it kind of like that a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit actually. I mean, in the sense that there's treasure and there's a sword that's discovered at some point in time, though it's Wincott that ends up with it. And I think probably more importantly than that, there is a moral, what would we say, a reconciliation between both of them and their relationship, but ultimately who they choose to be by the end of the book. So they start off as really cynical scoundrel father-son thieves who want to murder one another, or at least one wants to murder the other, and by the end of it have reconciled their relationship through hardship as they search for this treasure. And so that is definitely the backdrop of the book.
Oh, okay. So how did you come up with the concept of dungeons and dysfunction?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, the first thing was I was on a writing retreat a number of years ago, and I wrote a short story that was based in this world, and the story wasn't any good, but it gave me a starting point in a place that I really liked, and my stories are place-based, and they draw a lot from the geography and culture and climate of northern British Columbia, where I live. And I had this image in my head of a thief, running up the side of a snowy mountainscape and disappearing into the mountain, looking over his shoulder. And it just kept being in my head. Who was this person? What were they after? What were they running from? What were they running towards? And so I started to write the story, and it took me a little while to figure it out. But one thing that I figured out really early on was this dynamic of a thief entering an abandoned city in search of something, and then by happenstance running into another thief who turns out to be his son, and they haven't spoken for years and they don't like one another. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic. But if I step back a bit, I'm a big fan of sword and sorcery and Dungeons and Dragons and fun action adventure kind of novels. And so I wanted to write that kind of a story, something that was more for a young adult audience, which is a bit different for me. Typically, I write horror and dark fiction. I wanted to write something that was really fun to read, fun to like the characters. You don't have to think too hard about it, and takes you on an adventure, takes you for a ride. And so that's the kind of thing that I loved reading when I was, 14. I still love reading it, and I wanted to see if I could try my hand at that type of story.
Wow. So is it your first book, like your first one of writing young adult, or?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And, it's I hate to admit this, but I didn't intend it originally to be a young adult book. I just wanted to write the type of fantasy story that I love to read. And it turns out I'm rather childish and I like to read young adult fantasy books. And so by the time it was done, it took me, I actually shelved it for about 3 years, and not because of anything other than I was busy with other projects and other things in life. And I finally went back to it late last year to start editing it, and realized that what I had written was actually a young adult fantasy.
Oh.
And so that was a path of discovery for me. And I was like, okay, I guess that's what this is. And that's what we're going to put out in the world, which is very different than anything I've previously published.
Oh, okay. So what makes the Treasure of Roan so legendary?
Well, in the story, no one really knows what it is. And so this ancient city of Roan, which is built inside of a mountain, has been abandoned, and it's haunted with all kinds of creatures, and there's rumors about it and what's in there, and people have gone after it, and anybody who's ever gone into the city, according to local mythology and legend, has never come out. And so the rumor is that there's some fabulous treasure deep inside this city from a more ancient time and ancient civilization. And so there's a number of groups in the story who are after it, all for their own reasons. And we are introduced to Wincott and Sish at the beginning, and it's through their eyes that we actually see this search for the treasure. And so in many ways, it's a bit of a MacGuffin story. They're sort of propelled to try and find something. And I have to admit as well, I had a good idea of what the treasure was, but I didn't fully know when I started writing it. It took me my own path and adventure to uncover ultimately what it ends up being and how that plays into the larger backdrop of this medieval style fantasy action adventure world.
Oh, okay. So is the city like inspired by any real world locations or myths?
Yeah, so it's so as I said earlier, place based, and I like to draw on geography. I don't know how familiar you are with British Columbia, but it's the westernmost province here in Canada. It's the size of California, Oregon, and Washington put together, and it's nothing but mountains and rivers and glaciers and endless forests and all kinds of fascinating geography. And so I've had the good fortune to live in this province my whole life and explore it and see it. And so while I was on that writing trip a number of years ago down to an area called the Robson Valley, which is 2 hours east of where I live in Prince George, there's this beautiful forested valley with big, tall, glaciated mountains on either side of it, Rocky Mountains on one side and Caribou Mountains on the other. And so that was the inspiration for the geography in the place. So it is based on that, and the geography largely lines up. But as for the city itself, of course, that doesn't exist in real life unless there's an ancient city under the Robson Valley. I don't know anything. But I thought, well, let's play with this. What could be inside of a mountain? What would a more ancient civilization carve out of a mountain and have in there? What is that ancient civilization? And so the actual city itself it takes its inspiration a little bit from, I would say, both the Mines of Moria on one side, and then on the other side, I'd say Journey to the Center of the Earth. And so you've got kind of a combination there of a classic sort of dark, dreary dungeon, almost like a dwarven sort of smithed underground city within this mountain. But then also a discovery of almost a completely different ecosystem down there, and a completely different history and different creatures and all kinds of other things. So lots of history down there as well.
Oh, okay. So how do you balance humor with dark themes in the story?
That's a good question. I probably tried to think of it as I wrote it around how things land, and I would say tempo, so speed. So really, I was thinking of the story as I ratcheted between the two. What's true to the characters, but also, how if I'm a reader, what is the cadence of the moments that are light and humorous versus the moments where we have to get serious? And so it's definitely a movie or a book, a movie. It's like a movie, but it's a book. It's definitely a book or a story that ratchets between kind of two different modes. One is that cynical, mirth-filled, dark humor of sort of thieving and people trying to go through dungeons and like searching for treasure. And so it pokes fun at some of those tropes in a tongue-in-cheek way, but I think also honors them. And so that's the fun, lighthearted side. But then it has lots of sort of fireside quiet moments, which I'm a big fan of in stories. So the story will move along. It'll be sort of boom, 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 boom with action and humor and sort of different things going on. And then we'll have a moment where the reader can catch their breath. And it's a moment by, as I call fireside moments, but it's like sort of that moment where your party, to use a video game term, is taking a rest around a fire and having a conversation. And that's where you get that character. And so I go back and forth between those two things. I can't say that I know. It's up to the readers to determine whether or not I've captured that cadence properly. But that was the intent, was to try and go between those two things.
Oh, nice. So did you create like full backstories for the Dungeoneers?
No, I'm what in the writing world they call a pantser. So I wrote by the seat of my pants, and I struggled too. I got the first sort of, I'm going to say 50, 60 pages pretty solid to what it even is today after its draft within a few weeks. And I stalled for a year. And I tried multiple times to figure out where the story was going, what was going on, and realized that ultimately, actually, I did need to, at least in my mind and in my sketchbook of notes, I had to figure out a little bit more backstory and figure out who was there and what were they doing. And the breakthrough moment for me in getting the story to move was actually, to some extent, geography within the city of Roan. In the original story, I had them going into, I guess, the new or upper city, and that was where the story was going. So they kind of get into the city, and then they're going to explore this dark and dreary part. And then I found, actually, in order to make the story work, I had to turn them around, and they have to go across a lake and then get into a much deeper, different part of the city. Once I figured out that, the rest of the story actually came together without an issue. And only toward the end, probably the last quarter, did I really have to plan out chapter by chapter in order to bring all the different threads together. But I would say once I was writing, I was a voracious mental and actual physical note taker as well. And so I wasn't writing chapter outlines, but I was definitely sketching out, okay, who is this person? How are they related to that person? How is this consistent? How does magic work in this world? How does treasure work in this world? How do all these things sort of interplay? And one thing that was super easy for me was because I was drawing on the geography of British Columbia, I didn't really have to invent that part of it. That part of it was already there for me. And so I just used that, and that became a nice little template.
Oh, okay. So how would you describe the world building process for your novel?
It definitely a process of iteration and discovery and hammering at ideas again and again. So as you go through this, it's not a European medieval style fantasy or even an American. It's Canadian. And what I mean by that is that there's a couple of key things in here that I think are particularly unique to our own culture and history in this country. And one of them is that in this world, climate, landscape, and the fact that the climate and the landscape are there trying to kill you figures largely into this. So it is definitely set in a remote wilderness, both inside or outside of Roan, in a wintry landscape, and then once they're actually in the city, there's a similar theme there of the landscape and the flora and fauna trying to kill you, which I think is a very Canadian thing because that's kind of the reality. And then the other thing is that, and I don't really come right out and say this, but as you get into the book, you start to learn about what's called the E&E Company and the Royal Merchant Guilds, two different companies. And these two different companies are the ones that actually control most of the landscape and the economy in this area called Northern Erder. And that's based on the fur trading companies of when the European empires started to settle and expand across North America, but particularly in Canada. And so their likeness would be the Northwest Company or the Hudson's Bay Company. Those figure largely in the building and the settlement of Canada, especially in the western part of the country. And so I use that as a template. It's not exact. It's definitely not an allegory or drawing on very specifics, but you'll see that we are on the outer rim of empire here. We are away from the core politics, the money, the wealth, but there is power in this place. And there are these two warring companies that trade things in this fantasy world, trying to control this territory, which is very similar to originally the Hudson's Bay Company and the Northwest Company before they merged. And so I drew on that, and even, like position names, like I don't have like a company CEO. It's you're a factor. And a factor would have been the head of a trading fort in the Hudson's Bay Company in Canada from the 1600s right through till the early 20th century. And so those types of things, even the name of the main town, which we see quite a bit, it's a city, it's called Fort Rivers. And again, in Canada, if you're in central or northern Canada, there's a lot of cities that the name starts with Prince, Port, or Fort. And so that also is hearkening back to that sort of colonial history and the impact that those trading empires had on the landscape of what that looked like.
Oh, wow. So on your cover, do you have like the picture of the like, I guess, town or something?
No. So the picture on the front, which was done by Dina Ray at eBook Builders, it's amazing. I'm just amazed at how well she captured it. It's a likeness of deep in the city of Roan. So you don't, and why I wanted that is when I went to Dina, I asked her, I said, look, like this is young adult fantasy, but I want something with some whimsy. Like I want it to be fun. I don't want it to be taken too serious or too dark. And if we're going to show like a wintry landscape, of up above in that valley outside of the city, I don't think it's really going to attract anybody's attention because it's just mountains and stone that looks dark. And that's not actually what this book is. This book is it's two thieves arguing with one another, reconciling their relationship, and at odds with one another, stuck with one another while they're trying to survive this dungeon. And then they have friends around them that are coming in, friends and frenemies, who are also there for their own reasons or somewhat related to them, searching for this treasure. And the two thieves are getting sort of pushed and pulled. And only through the novel do you kind of find out, well, who's really working for who's a liar, who isn't a liar, like what's actually going on here. And so I wanted to capture that sort of ludicrousness of the story through that whimsy, and also send a message clearly to folks. And if you look at the cover, that this is young adult. Now anybody can read it. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is more of that likeness. So it captures more of Roan than it does of that world I talked about. But Roan is of that world.
Oh, okay. So was it challenging to write characters who are both flawed and likable?
No, I just sort of captured, I just sort of reflected on how flawed I am, and so that kind of helped. It's in some ways, it took a long time for me as a writer to understand how to create flawed characters and how to get them to a point where they made bad decisions that had consequences, but we could understand why they made a bad decision. So that was something I struggled with as a fiction writer very early on, is how do you get them to make a bad decision, but like a bad decision that actually we can understand why they made that decision or why they did that thing in that moment. And part of that, and it was, you see in horror movies, especially in like teenage slasher flicks, that the teenagers are often making bad decisions, right? Like they're splitting up, they're running, they're maybe going to places that you or I would never go to, that are obviously going to lead to something back, or perhaps them getting their head cut off or whatever it might be. And so I didn't want that kind of rationale. I wanted a perspective of what these two thieves, who they were, what they came from. And so that did necessitate, back to your earlier conversation, to figure out a bit of history. And so the story itself is not actually just told in real time as they progress through the story. It's actually also a series of flashbacks that traces their relationship from the moment they met until basically they get into the dungeon. And it's told from each of their perspectives. And so through the course of the book, you get these flashbacks of, okay, well, what did Wincott, what was he doing when he first met Sish? How old was Sish? What was it like for Sish when he was a kid in this crazy household with this older thief who's not really his dad, but is now his dad? He doesn't have anywhere else to go. And what did it look like as he was trained to be a thief? How did he feel about that? And that became a really cool excuse to do flashbacks, but flashbacks with little mini dungeon adventures in them. And so inside of those flashbacks, you're actually seeing other smaller dungeons that are almost, if you know Dungeons and Dragons, it's like a dungeon delve. So instead of it being a 3 or 4 month campaign, this flashback chapter would be like a 3 or 4 hour delve. And it sort of tells us a bit about those characters and sheds lights on that, but it also gives us something fun and funny. So we get to see different parts of the world outside of Roan at different periods of time. And then hopefully, if I pulled it off, we understand the rationale of how flawed they are, but conflicted, and the nature of their relationship, which ultimately leads them to this moment where they come together in the city and then have to try and survive it.
Oh, okay. So what makes Wincott's goblin kill count such a burden?
So that's where the story starts. I don't mind giving it away.
Oh,
He's an older, near retirement thief. He can't thieve in the city of Fort Rivers anymore because he's burned all his bridges with people there. And so we're presented at the start of the story. The very first scene is him running from a band of goblins who are trying to kill him. And the story he tells us in the beginning is that he was in an abandoned castle across the valley from Roan, a place called Fort Shatterstill. And he was trying to rob the goblins of some treasure so that he could kind of go back and fence it and make ends meet. So that's where the story starts, is him getting chased by goblins. Well, interestingly enough, as the story goes on, we find out that's true, but it's only part of the truth. There was other reasons as to why he was down in that valley and in Fort Shatterstill. And then we also see that the goblins never really leave. And the goblins aren't flat characters like in some other fantasy, just to be dispatched at will and get a kill count. The goblins are actually a bit like I don't know if you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but there's like a secret society in there that protects the Grail. Well, similar idea here on what the goblins' role is in relation to Roan. Yeah.
Okay, I like that. So what was your favorite scene to write without giving it away? What was your favorite scene?
I would say my favorite scene to write was probably the moment that their relationship blew apart on in a flashback chapter when Sish is still sort of a teenager and a job goes wrong and Wincott doesn't handle it. And it's actually a tough chapter. It's hard. Like it hits hard on the dynamic between the two of them and where it leads them. And ultimately it's from that moment that we understand why they have this falling out. But I really enjoyed writing it because it felt so natural. By that point in the book, I had felt that I had really sketched out those two characters and their dynamic really well, and it just naturally came together. I didn't have to force it. It was, oh yeah, that's what happens. It's almost, at times in this book, it felt a bit like archaeology. Like once I kind of got a good start and I understood where I was going in the background, I was just dusting back the dirt and revealing what was already there. And so when you have those moments, that feels really, really good as a writer. And I hope it comes across as effectively for the reader.
Nice. So would you say this book is more character driven or plot driven?
Character driven. It's a MacGuffin story. So, I mean, there's plot there by their various decisions and conflicts and their interactions and relationships with one another, no question. But it's ultimately about people. It's about fathers and sons. It's about friendship. It's about found family. It's about trauma that we carry with us over time. It's about struggling to be a parent, what that means, effectively a step parent. and like, how do parents show up in your life, whether it's a step parent or a blood parent, and to what extent does that relationship matter, if it's a natural born parent or you've come into somebody's life. And so that and those themes are in there. Young love is in there as well. Caring for one another, reconciling some of those relationships. And I think if I've done a good job understanding too why the antagonists or the villains do what they do, they actually, there's good rationale for it. And so I'd say for me, this book is really about people, things that we see in our lives in this world all the time. And I just had them all crash together in this fantasy setting and have a good time, and also struggle with a few things.
Oh, okay. Okay. So is this book the start of a series or a standalone?
It's the start.
Oh,
This is definitely a world I want to go back to, characters I want to go back to. And
okay.
I already kind of have I've got the first chapter written of the next one. And
Nice.
it's, I mean, I don't know how many I'm going to write. I hope I'm going to write them for the rest of my life, as long as, I have good ideas and stories and that type of thing. But yeah, I didn't know that when I first started writing it. I thought it would just be, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a novella, or if it was going to be a novel. Ended up being a novel. And then as I went through it, I was like, yeah, I want to go back there. And that for me is ultimately, why, I think anybody serializes anything. But for me, why I'd want to go back is, do you want to go back to that place? And do you want to go back and spend time with those people? And in this case, I found by the end of this first journey, I absolutely do. I want to know what happens next to these
So,
friends.
so how many are you gonna have? Do you know how
I have
many
no
you're gonna
idea.
have to? Oh,
No idea. No idea. It could be, I mean, let's see if I can write the second one, first and foremost, so that it's more than one, and how they're ultimately received. And I mean, sky's the limit, potentially.
yeah.
And the only thing that gets in my way is A, time to write, and B, any other competing ideas or projects that I might want to get out in the in between that delay, coming back to the Dungeoneers as a series again and again.
I know this is a young adult, or is it a young adult book? It is a young.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
definitely, it is positioned that way.
Okay. Even though this is a young adult book, I still am interested in the story. Like since we're talking about it, I'm like, I like it.
Well, that's good.
So which characters surprised you the most as you wrote them?
Um, who surprised me the most? I would probably say the antagonist, Falk. In the beginning, I thought that he was just an embittered old former deputy factor of the E&E trading company, and I think, as what I learned over time is he's actually, a man with who believes he's doing the right thing, for everybody, for the long term, for the region they live in, and trying to upset the apple cart. And he's ultimately a person, I think, that he's not a good person, I would say, but he's got his own code and what he thinks is right, and he sticks by it, and kind of stands out, similar to some of the historical figures. I won't say who from the Hudson's Bay Company that I kind of model them after. But definitely somebody who is after something, believes in it, has a good rationale for what he's done, and there's some redeeming qualities in all of it. But I would say, in short, he's a person where the ends justify the means. And
Oh.
so if you look at his character, I don't know that he would say that. He might say that,
Mhm.
but that is who he is. Whereas the Dungeoneers, who are sort of Sish and Wingcup, but not really. They're another group in there. They are your do-gooder adventurers, where the means never justify the ends. And so they're like your kind of your superhero classic fantasy party of a wizard, a ranger, and and barbarian kind of thing, right? So very different than folk. And then you've got Wingcott and Sish kind of caught in the middle of which side are they ultimately on? Are they morally ambiguous? Are chaotic neutral? Or lawfully good? Like where do they land?
Oh, nice. So do you think Wincott is redeemable?
Yes. Yeah, he is. Flawed. Flawed for sure. And I mean, I think it's open for debate on whether or not he's a what we would define as a good person. But I mean, he's a person who I think is the result of his own upbringing and the world that he's in, and became what he became because of what he had to survive and what he had to do to keep food on the table and survive in the world that he's in. And so I think to that extent, if you look at it from that perspective, you understand where he's coming from, despite some of the things that he's done that aren't really, fantastic or that we would endorse in modern society.
Oh, okay. So where can my listeners buy your books?
Amazon. So pre-orders are up now for the ebook. So amazon.ca or amazon.com, the Dungeoneers and the Treasure of Roan. Check it out. Paperback will be available August 15th. And check out my website as well, joelmackay.ca. And you can find latest news and updates on the book and where to buy it from there.
Nice. So how did you approach writing humor in fantasy without going too far?
I think one of the things I'm a big fan of is snappy dialogue, and people that point out the ludicrousness of a situation or say plainly what we're all thinking in any situation. And I think people who get punched in the face and screw up or don't understand things, which we all do all the time. And so I it's not slapstick humor. They're not jokes with setups and then punchlines. That's not the type of humor we have. It's more the everyday humor that would happen to relatively normal people who are relatively rational, who are just trying to figure it out as they go. And so I think, I borrowed a lot from stories where I've seen it executed well before. Stories like Scott Lynch's The Lies of Loch Lamora, which again is about thieves in the fantasy world and some of that sort of twisted, cynical, dark humor that's in there. But again, I'll say it, like Indiana Jones is a really good example of, and he even says it in Raiders. He's making it up as he goes. And I think there's a line like that in the Dungeoneers, where one of the characters says that exact thing, right? They're just kind of keep getting thrown into things, and they're making it up as they go. So best laid plans, right? And I think the humor comes out of that and their own reactions to situations and trying to see as they're trying to figure things out. And then also like not really being honest with one another about why they're there. Like struggling with trauma, but also like not really kind of, what are they actually thinking, and so I think the humor comes out in those moments.
Oh, okay. So how did you handle the feedback from your readers? Oh, wait, it hasn't came out yet. So how do you think that they're going to react to it? Like,
I have no idea. And so we'll see.
You don't have ARC readers, or is it called ARC readers?
Advanced readers? Anybody? Yeah, I do. I've got beta readers. It's kind of
beta.
And people have read it. I mean, the feedback's been very positive. But I take it with a grain of salt, right? Because they're people you trust and that sort of thing. But I don't know. I mean, with my previous two books, both of which are horror, I mean, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive for them. But this is different. And so I have to say, I'm a little nervous, right? Like, it was nervous for me, a lot of nerves when I published my first horror, because, in that case, you're trying to, scare the pants off of people, frankly. And you don't know if you're going to pull it off. And it's different for everybody. And now in this case, I'm, somewhat established in writing horror and in my own little world anyway. And, I'm saying, hey, if you like my horror, why don't you come over here and write this and check out this young adult fantasy action adventure? Like what am I? So, I'm nervous about that on whether or not I pulled it off. But ultimately, at this point in time, she's done, buried, and put to bed, as we used to say in the newspaper business. So the story is the story. People are going to react to it. Some people I hope, are going to love it and like it. And then I know there's always going to be some that it's not their thing. But that's beyond my control at this point in time. I wrote the story actually really for me. I'm proud of it. I really like it. I like the characters. I like it enough that I want to go back and write another one. And so I'm hoping that, the fun I had creating this book comes across on the page.
Oh, okay. So which authors influenced your work the most?
On the fantasy side, I mean, again, Scott Lynch, who I've mentioned, Nicholas Eames, who's a British Columbia author here, transplant from Ontario, but he lives here now. His books, Kings of the Wilds, one of them came out a few years ago. A lot of humor in that too. So I'd say between him and Scott, like their work really influenced me. But I grew up with fantasy, like most people, like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and all of that. But those were my baselines. Fantasy is my home as a reader, ultimately, and my foundation. But where I really fell in love with it was with Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms books, which are Dungeons and Dragons campaign novelizations of campaign-based stories. And so those novels, series of novels that came out, a lot of them in the 80s and 90s, really inspired me. Raymond D. Feist would be another one. His Rift War cycle really showed me what tight, snappy, but reading is, but also memorable characters that you want to go back to again and again, and how to get that across. So there's a number of authors that way. And then again, as a horror guy, I mean, I always lean and draw on from horror, but the world's most famous horror writer is also a fantasy writer, and that's Stephen King. And so, Stephen King's books on writing, whether it's horror, it's fantasy, whatever it is, hard case crime novels, I don't just read them to enjoy them. Though I do that, I'm studying the text and the structure and how he's handling things, how he's describing things, and his pacing, and to what level are you going into detail, to what level are you not going into detail. Yeah. I mean, there are authors who I love, like Stephen Erickson, George R.R. Martin, Robert Jordan, whose books are Robin Hobb, who are deep and rich in lore and back history, and have been planned out and have a level of detail, like even around like dinners and meals, that can go on for multiple pages. It's almost Dickensian in its sort of its depth. I'm not that writer. I'm not trying to be. I love that type of literature, but I'm more of the quick and keep it moving, like an old sword and sorcery book. So also Robert E. Howard would be a big inspiration for me.
Oh, okay. Nice. And my last and final question before I let you go is, what's next on your writing calendar? What do you have next?
I'm going back to horror.
Oh.
So I have a fully written cosmic horror novel. It's a god-awful, terrifying, dark, bloody, haunting / monsters set in British Columbia that I'm doing edits on right now. It's actually the subject of my thesis for my master's in lit. Nice. So I've got to finish the master's and defend the book as my thesis, and then move down the road of publishing it. So I'll be going back to horror for that. And then meantime, I've got some side projects. And like I said, I did write not too long ago the first chapter of that second Dungeoneers novel. And it came out easy, real easy. And I kind of know the thrust of what that next book is going to be. I'm not going to say much more because I could be wrong. I don't know until I actually write it.
Nice. Well, I look forward to reading your books. I want to thank you so much, Joel, for being a guest on my podcast today and chatting with me.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
You have a great day.
You too.
Bye. Hey everyone, I want to thank you all so much for listening to my interview with Joel. If you like to purchase his books, he did say his website in the interview, so go ahead over and purchase his books. I look forward to reading them as well. So thank you all so much for listening. Have a great day. See you next time for the next interview. Bye.